Hello and welcome to the show. This is the third day of 1903 release party here on the Docker channel, on my channel on YouTube. We're streaming to Facebook, all the things, all at the same time. So thanks for joining us. If you're on the show live, this is a demo and question and answer format. So you get to jump in the chat wherever you're at and throw questions about what we're looking at, have a conversation with us. And we've got, just like the last 2 days, a bunch of new demos, new guests on the show, and this whole week is focused on Docker's 1903 release that they did last week. So we've got this is a Docker Captain exclusive on the show, and let's bring in the two guests, which you've seen one of them before, and one of them is, I believe, new. On the left over on your screen is Dimitri. I think this is your first time on the show, right?
Yeah, right. This is the first time on the show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and he's right now in Greece, but he's actually normally in Barcelona running the Docker Barcelona meetup. He is the founder at Harbor Cloud Solutions, and I'm super excited to have him on the show because he's going to talk to us about rootless Docker, which is a brand new thing this year, and we'll talk about why that's important and why you might want to check it out. And then in the middle there, he's back on the show, Michael Irwin from the Virginia Tech. He's an application architect there. He's an adjunct faculty instructor talking about Docker and actually introducing Docker to students, which is a really great thing to get people started early on containers. And he's been doing Docker for a while. He helps with the meetup there. He's a community leader. He's a Docker captain. And you've seen him on the show before. And if you've been to DockerCon, you might have seen him in a little dino suit at DockerCon before.
Yes.
So, welcome to the
That's
show.
my legacy now.
That's your
Thanks,
legacy. So we're going to have a little bit of fun today. We're going to be talking about several things. Michael's going to go into Docker app. And if you were watching the show earlier this year, we talked about Docker app, but now it's new and improved. It's added straight back into the Docker command line. Basically, it's not a separate app anymore. So he'll be showing off some of the cool functionality of that. But first up, we're going to be talking about rootless Docker and why that's a thing that we've started to care about. So Dimitri, what's the elevator pitch to someone who knows containers and they know how to run Docker now? Why should they care about rootless Docker?
Yeah, so basically, first of all, why do we need containers in the first place? Basically, what we want to do with containers is that we want to isolate the applications inside the specific user space so that they cannot do things outside of that space and isolate them in that context. But once someone is able to run containers, what we know is that normally what we say, if you have access to the Docker socket, then basically you are root of the application of the operating system. And basically this means that if someone can access the Docker socket, then he's a root on the operating system, and we don't want that. We basically want someone to be able to have isolated that and not being able to do this kind of things. And
right.
Basically with rootless, what we are able to do is that Sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah, I have a brain freeze right now.
No, it's okay.
Basically with rootless, what we have is the ability in order to run containers, but not with root access in that operating system. So someone can run some containers without being root. So if someone breaks out of that container, then he cannot access the root operating system, let's say. So
right.
Basically, what you do is you create some kind of another layer of security on top of containers.
Right. So this means that also, if I want to run a Docker container, if I'm running in rootless mode, does that mean I don't even need root? I can just be a regular user?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, if you don't need the root in order to be able to install Docker in some machine, and you can use Docker as a normal user of that specific machine. And you can create containers as if you are a root, and create sub-users, sub-containers, but you don't need root access in that specific machine.
Yeah.
So basically, there are two kind of benefits in two different regions, in two different type of users, let's say. Ones are the users that they are developers. Maybe they don't have root access in that specific machine that they are working on. And now with Docker rootless, they can install Docker without having root access. And they can use that in order to run containers in their own environment. And the other one is if you're an operator, or if you're using, if you have a cluster, for example, and you want to harden your own cluster, and you don't want to run containers using a Docker in root mode, but you want to use it in a user land, in a specific user, so that even if someone breaks out of that specific container, then he cannot access the root to that specific machine. So you have a basically and one more layer of security on that specific machine.
Right.
And basically that's the idea. It's you have some kind of restrictions, but we're going to see that on the demo. But basically you can do whatever you can do normally with containers.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Let's get to some demos. I think sometimes it's great to talk about something, but it's also cool to see a demo.
Let's go to the demo then. Okay. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we're not seeing your screen yet, though.
Just
no.
Now?
Yeah, we see a screen.
Okay, 1 second. Can you see now the screen?
All right, we got it. Your shell.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So basically what we have here is I have created a specific, my machine is a Mac, so I cannot show the Docker rootless in my Macs because basically we want to have a Linux kernel on it. And so what I'm using is I'm using a Vagrant and VirtualBox in order to run virtual machines. And VirtualBox is a virtual machine runtime, and Vagrant is basically a provider for virtual machines in VirtualBox. And this is basically my configuration. I have two specific machines that I'm creating. One is a rootless, which is Ubuntu of the Xenial version 64. And the other is the rootful, basically. So what we want is the rootless is I'm going to do an installation of Docker in rootless mode. In the rootful, basically, I'm going to do a normal installation of Docker. And I have them already running. And so if I do status, you'll see that these two machines are running. Just 1 second. Okay. So on the top screen, I'm going to log into the rootless machine. And in the bottom screen, I'm going to SSH to the rootful machine.
I like rootful.
Yeah, I don't know if it's written like that, but yeah.
Yeah, it sounds good. We just made up a new word, rootful. If it wasn't a thing, it's now a thing.
Okay, so how are we going to install rootless mode here? So I'm just going to show you what are the commands for it. I have a script which is the set up here, which basically the only thing that I need in order to prepare the operating system, the Ubuntu Xenial 64 version, is I want to activate IP tables in the kernel. Once I have that, then basically what I want to do is I want to install Docker with this command. Basically, this is a script that's getdocker.com, rootless, and okay, normally you should not sh scripts from the internet like that, but let's say that we know the origin is okay.
That's true. We are doing at least SSL over to Docker's URL, so it would have to require someone to take advantage of them, right? But you could always pull it down and look
exactly. You can always pull it down, review it, and then execute it, right?
Yeah.
So I already executed it before, so basically it knows that I already installed it. But if you are in a fresh machine, this should be sufficient in order to install the rootless mode. And what the rootless mode does is creates a Docker service in the systemd, which basically runs inside your home directory. So you see this is the Docker service inside my home vagrant, which is my username in that machine, and there is where the systemd service is installed. And if you see the binary, for example, is the vagrant being dockerd rootless in experimental mode, and the storage driver is overlay. And once I have this installed, if I do docker ps, it will not do anything because I don't have in the var docker socket, I don't have running anything there, because my socket right now is inside this user space in the run user 1000 docker socket. So I need to export this docker host. And now if I do docker ps, then you can see that I can use Docker and I can check it.
Yeah.
If I do docker hello world, for example, you can see that now I can run things inside the container. And docker ps, for example, don't have anything. And see here, you can see the containers that already run. In the rootful environment, let's do the same thing here. And in order to install it there, basically the command is this one. And it's the get docker, and then you download the script, you execute it. And once you execute it, docker, and you have everything. But I already have it installed, so I'm just going to stop it now. And once you have it installed, then you can see that Docker is running. So let's see now what are the differences between these two environments. If I do a ps here and check about Docker, you will see that my Docker is running as root, and it's running in this with this command. Instead here, if I search for Docker, you will see that there are some other commands that because it's using rootless kit. And if you see all of those commands are running in user vagrant, so there is no root user running anything. And that's basically the biggest difference between those two. So let's try and run the same commands on both machines. Docker run hello world. You will see that this runs the same thing. And let's see some other things that we can run. First of all, I would like to say one other difference. If you are in the rootful machine here, right now you can see that the docker ps is running directly, but this is because if we're checking the groups, you can see that I have the Docker group here. And if I go and log in as, I think there is an Ubuntu user here, and if I do docker ps, I cannot do anything with the socket, and this is because I don't belong to the Docker group. So this is one of the differences that if you belong to the Docker group, then basically you have root access to the Docker socket, and if you don't belong to the Docker group, then basically you need to do sudo docker ps. And this is one way of accessing the socket in the rootful machine. And another way is to use the group. And the difference here on the rootless is that you don't need neither of those. You don't need to have sudo to some kind of socket that belongs to another user. You just run it in your own user space, everything. Okay, so let's see some other commands. For example, let's see where is our things that are running inside the rootful. If we check to the var lib docker overlay, this is where our overlays are running inside the rootful environment. But if we check the same thing here, you will see that we don't have anything there. And this is because everything is running in our own user space. And I can find these things in this directory, which is the local shared Docker, and then here you can see the overlay directories. And you can see that these are inside the same user space, in my own user. So another difference that we can find, for example, is that let's run something now, which is exposing a port. So I'm running an Nginx, and I'm running it, exposing it in the 32,768 port. And I'm going to do the same here also. Yeah, that should be like this. Okay, so if I do now here localhost, now here you can see the nginx, and the same thing happens here. Okay, until now it's the same. But if we go and we try to do expose a port, let's stop this one. And if we expose a port in the 80, you can see that because I'm in the user land, I cannot expose a port under the 1000 number.
Right.
And this is because the only root user can expose ports under that number. And in the rootful environment, you can see that this is possible.
Yeah,
so
and that's
this is
a Linux
one of the
limitation, right?
difference.
Yeah,
this is a kernel limitation. Yeah, exactly. So this is because as a normal user, you cannot go in that kind of port, so it's impossible to go there. And more or less that's the differences. I don't have any more demos for it. I don't know if you want, we can do some questions or discuss a little bit more about the rootless mode.
Yeah, there's definitely some questions. One of them was about the rootless can't share the Docker socket, for example. So, and I gave you might want to expand on this. I kind of gave an answer saying, well, they're different sockets. The Docker daemon that's in rootful mode is in a different URL in the file system, right? It's a different path. So, I guess technically could you run both of these at the same time?
I suppose so.
I don't know why you would, but you could if you were someone who didn't have Docker. If you didn't have root access or Docker group access, and you wanted to run Docker on a machine that already had Docker and root, I guess all the files and everything are in the different paths, right? So,
if you have a, let's say, rootful mode Docker running in the var directory, then normally that is for all the users. But if you're running it in your own user land, then basically it's just single user, right? So you should be able to share that socket if you give access to some other users, but normally that's not the use case.
Yeah. Another question on that is saying that, can I use mounts and volumes only with files that my user has permission to? And yes, that is true, because everything here is scoped to your user account, right? So it's only for you. Yeah,
exactly. So basically what your user can do is what your containers can do.
Yeah. And now technically you could have you technically could be someone who has root and you're just choosing to run this in your user account, but because the Docker daemon in this case is running under your user account, it's only going to have access and permissions to the things in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see what else. Marcos from yesterday. Marcos Nils is on the call. He has many questions. How about Swarm? Does that work? Good question.
It should be able to work, but I haven't tested it yet.
Yeah. So what if you just try Docker Swarm init in the top one?
Let's try that one.
Yeah, let's see that, and then maybe do a service create maybe on a. We're gonna make random demos. All right. So it says it's a manager. Maybe service create on an Nginx or something. Yeah, running on port 8080 or something. In theory, I would think that it would work because as long as you don't try to publish on ports. One thing might be interesting is will it allow the veth that it creates? Can it? Oh, that's a good point. Because does Docker's rootless Docker doesn't have access to create virtual interfaces, does it?
I don't see why not.
I'm trying to think.
Why it shouldn't be able to create virtual interface.
Yeah. So what happens when you do a list of the networks on there, like a Docker network ls on the?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does have them.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
maybe it can't use host mode or something. I remembered reading something about there was something in networking that it couldn't do without root because that was changing the NIC, basically. It
Yeah, I
might
remember.
be using host network.
Yeah, I remember hearing something about that too.
I mean, yeah, what you probably cannot do is, for example, with because of the limitation of the less than 1,000 port, you probably cannot have a proxy running and doing a balancing between your own services below that. So you cannot expose basically a port below that number in your mode either.
Yeah.
I don't know if Ingress needs something like that.
Marcos is asking about daemonless as well. Is it possible for us to run
Yeah,
it?
that's a different thing. I mean, this is not daemonless, this is rootless. And basically the difference is that daemonless, you should not be needing any daemon behind that. And with Docker, we don't have daemonless. I think that we could do something like that with container D, maybe, correct?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess fundamentally that would be, I can see how that would be a little tricky because the Docker CLI just talks to the engine.
Basically the Docker CLI, the way it is being designed is that it's a client server, so it needs to have a daemon.
It would almost be like there need to be a CLI add-on that in the background is just really running the Docker D process, but not technically running it as a daemon, and it's just running it as part of the Docker run. And because then you couldn't do Docker run -D, right? You'd have to do. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that would be an interesting use case for CI/CD, for example. So in CI/CD, basically what you want is want to be able to create containers, but the problem is that if you have a CI/CD that you want to run it in containers also, then you basically need containers inside containers. And then this makes it more complicated. One way of overriding that is basically you can do containers alongside containers. So basically exposing your Docker socket inside your CI/CD container, and you can run more containers inside that, but in the same Docker engine. And the other thing that you can do is you can run Docker inside the Docker. So basically you can have a Docker daemon inside your CI/CD container. And the user land, basically this helps in order to eliminate more of the restrictions that the Docker in CI/CD has, because previously you needed to have privileged mode, I think, and if you are using userland, maybe this privileged mode is not necessary in order to do CI/CD inside your own container, but I haven't tested that either.
Yeah.
And if you could have daemonless, then that would simplify a lot your CI/CD in order to not have a daemon or Docker inside your Docker system.
Right. Lots more questions. I don't actually think that's there's a question in there about checking binaries or applications inside the container working perfectly or not. Any Docker features in there? No, there are no new features related to that, and that's not related to daemonless or rootless Docker, rather. There's really Docker already has all the features you really need to check binaries or applications for working perfectly. You have Docker logs, you have Docker events, you have the Docker daemon logs. You might want to check on my YouTube channel for that, because we talked about last week. We actually had a sysadmin show where we talked all through the different levels of logging and events and monitoring stuff in Docker. So check that out. That's bretfisher.com/YouTube, and then search in there for sysadmin, and you can find that question. That was a good question though. From the security perspective, what's the difference between using rootless containers and user namespaces?
Depending, how are you going to create your user namespaces? If you need to have root access in order to create them, then basically you don't have rootless. But the question is not where you run them, is how you create them. And basically the rootless mode is that you create your user namespaces below your own user namespace.
Yeah. I mean, I guess technically, it's funny, depending on how technical you want to get, I think the difference between rootless containers and user namespaces is that in user namespaces, which I'm a big fan of, in fact, we have Oh, so let me switch back to this and this, and this. I think you can stop sharing screens. I think we're done with the screen sharing. So the daemonless stuff means that it's all confined, or not. I keep saying daemonless. The rootless, because we start talking about that. The rootless stuff, right? That's going to be more about only things being in my user. And the user namespaces means the Docker daemon's still running root, which means I have to have root access. I have to be able to run Docker as root. I have to be in the Docker group at least to get access to that. And then the user namespaces means that the user running in the container and the container itself are not running under the root process. But if there was some like 0-day bug in the Docker daemon that allowed you to somehow hop into the daemon from the container, then maybe the user namespaces wouldn't help you with that. Maybe. I don't know. It's from a security perspective, I think you could sit here and debate that all day, like which one's better. I'd say it's more about the use cases, right? Like if this is more about like I don't even want to have anything even possibly being root. The one thing we don't have in rootless in user namespaces, by the way, for Docker daemon yet, which I'm hoping we'll get to someday, is where you can run Docker daemon, then run user namespaces. And that what that means fundamentally is that every container is running as a non-root user. But right now they're not different users. So every container running in user namespaces is the same user account. And it would be super cool for security if we ran that where every single container you launch was a different user, which means they could, if someone had a container or exploit, they couldn't get to other containers. They
cannot jump to a different container. Yeah.
That was I think because the user namespace feature was largely written by another Docker captain, and Phil Estes, who's been on this show, talked about that last year actually on user namespaces, and I kind of asked him like, are we going to be able to get to the user namespaces user per container thing, which they call that like user namespaces 2.0, and he was like, I don't know if anyone is anyone wanting to build that feature. I don't know. So it would be a cool feature, but I don't think anybody's working on it yet. So Marcos is saying Swarm requires loading kernel modules and usually at root, so you can't use overlay, I think is one of the limitations. Overlay requires kernel modules. Maybe the virtual IP or the,
I think overlay works in Ubuntu. There is a patch for that in the kernel, and they are thinking about upstreaming that, but I'm not sure about the rest of the operating systems. I think not.
Biker's asking, if I exec into a rootless container, is there a password to access root or sudo to root? Or is root completely unavailable?
I think the root inside the container is basically the user of the host of the Docker daemon. But I think we can test that also.
Yeah. So that's a I like that answer. That's if you're in the container and you are the root user in the container, you still have no more privileges than what the Docker daemon's running at on the host, which is your user account. So in the container, technically you could give root in a container a password. You could make a bunch of users in the container, but on the host file system, they wouldn't have, in other words, because that would be an escalation in privileges beyond what you're allowed to do, right? So, good question though, Biker. Good question. I think that's it for the questions. Man, I thought this was going to be a quick topic. So, all right. You can ask more questions. We'll get to them at the end of the show, but we definitely want to get on to the next demo. Thank you so much, Dimitri. That's really cool stuff that I didn't realize it was that easy to install with the script now. With the original post that was put out by the Docker team was a little daunting to look at because you're like, this is an hour of my time to get it installed. But now that they've got an install script like you have for regular Docker, it goes great. All right, so Mike, you're up. We're going to be talking about Docker app and how that has changed. So a little bit of history before Mike starts. If you go back in this show in time, Mike was on here earlier this year talking about a separate command line that was Docker-app that allowed us to do some of these cool things. And now what Docker has done is they've taken that separate command line And they've added it in as a command line plugin, which if you watched this show yesterday, we talked about plugins a little bit. We're going to talk about those more today and what those really mean and what those are. So take it away, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Just as you said, there's been a lot of updates with Docker app recently, and so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Nice, I got the dyno going for me. So let's see, share my screen here. All right, let me know when you can see it here.
All right. 1 second.
All good.
I see your screen.
All right. So this is the Docker app repo, and it's been around obviously for a long time since they first announced it. But with the 1903 release is also coinciding with the 0.8.0 release of Docker app. And with this, and you can go through all the release information if you want, but when you download Docker app, you're actually going to be getting two different things. And I'm going to just show this real quick. So if I curl that and open it up real quick, you get two different binaries now. One, you get a plugin binary, and then you get a standalone binary. So if you've used Docker app in the past and you installed it as a standalone CLI, you can still do that. You can still run this as you want. But then there's also another plugin that's been designed, another binary that's been designed to work with the new plugin system that Brett was just talking about. As far as new features, Docker app with the latest release completely changed the underpinnings and how it works, and it's totally built on CNAB now, the Cloud Native Application Bundle spec. And I'm not going to go too much in that. There's quite a few talks. I helped out actually do a talk at DockerCon on that, so feel free to check that out. But so the underpinnings have changed quite a bit, and in fact, it's pretty much nothing like what it was in the 0.7 release, but that's okay. But with this release, also, we get to hook into a lot of the 1903 new features as well. So I'll show a couple of them off to you. So in yesterday's stream, we heard from Marcus about context switching, and I've got two different contexts set up here, one for my default and one for a play with Docker one, just like Marcus was showing yesterday. And what I can do is I can actually deploy using Docker app to this context. And I should probably rewind just a little bit and explain what Docker app is for those that may not be fully aware. So in the past, we were really good at making compose files, Docker stack files, and we'd put them in Git repos and like, hey, if you want to run my app, here's how to do it. In fact, let me open up here. So I've got the Swarm visualizer that I built. Oops, I guess I have some potential security vulnerabilities I need to fix.
That always happens the day of a demo.
I know it. Look at that. It's probably not something that really matters anyways, but I've got the Swarm visualizer, and I want to share it with people, and so they usually have to come in here and they copy and paste this container run command, which honestly I'm always forgetting what port I exposed it on, and so I have to keep referencing back to this. Or they can go and grab the compose file, spin it up, whatever. But Docker recognized there's got to be a better way to share these things, to share applications, to parameterize them, etc. And so what Docker app allows you to do is basically package up your stack files, your compose files, and make them shareable. And it's using image concepts, and so you can push them to a registry. It uses all the registry authentication and Docker CLI authentication that already exists, and it just makes it really easy. So what I'm going to do is I've got this Play with Docker Swarm cluster that I've already got up and running, and right now there's nothing running on it. But what I can do is from my local machine, I can use some of the new 1903 features with this deploy. So actually, let's take a look real quick. If I look at the install help, I'll see how I can do an install. But there's a new flag here for target context. And so even though I'm running on my machine, and if I do a Docker PS, this is going against my machine, I can either switch context, or I can do a Docker app install. Let's just install that Swarm visualizer real quick. It is Docker app. I'm going to specify the target context to be pwd. And so this is going to talk to that Play with Docker Swarm cluster and deploy the application over there. So let's take a look real quick. And I should see the service starting up here. I see that it's running. I guess I'm just not getting my badge right now, which is okay. I'll go ahead and just do this the other way. And this is on 3000. Oh, that's not the right way to. Actually, let me just refresh and see if I get it. That's all right. But anyways, we still see it up and running. That's all right. And all I had to do is now say, here's a single command. It'll pull the compose file and go. Now this application is much easier to share with everybody. Now that's just one feature of Docker app, but there's a lot more. I can parameterize things and allow people to change ports. I've got another app that I'll just show real quick. I'm sure you recognize this one, Brett, the voting app.
Hmm.
So I took the voting app. Yes. So I took the voting app and I added parameters to it so I can change the ports that they're going to expose, like the result service or the vote service, et cetera, on. And we can see what the default parameters are. I could say, let me run, let me do an inspect, but set the results.expose port to be 8080 instead. And voting app.docker app. Now, if I run this, it changes the parameter there. I see the different port for the results app. And if I actually did an install with this, I can change the ports that it would run on my Swarm cluster. So not only is it packaging these stack files up, it allows me to parameterize them in ways that I wasn't able to do before. Before, yeah, you could do some environment replacement in some areas, but this you can really parameterize anything in the compose file except for the image itself. But other than that, you can change, okay, how many replicas do I want? What CPU memory allocations do I want to give? All that kind of stuff. And a lot of that's been available in Docker app for quite a while. But let me back up a little bit. Okay,
Sure.
So I'm showing this as Docker app. And how's that working here? Let me actually go to my play with Docker cluster. I'll make the font size a little bit bigger here. Let's go, I don't know, maybe 30. Okay, I might wrap a little bit, or I'm actually SSH in here, so all right, I'll just do it from my local terminal. So with Docker app, okay, when is it installed? If you install Docker Desktop with 1903, you are getting the Docker app plugin installed automatically. There's nothing you have to do to get it installed. Now, if you want to use it, there's one thing you have to do. So for example, in this Play with Docker instance, if I do a Docker app, I don't know, just ls, I get this command that says Docker app is not a Docker command. And it's like, wait a second, it is installed here. The install location is in the home.docker/CLI plugins directory. There we go. And we see that Docker app is indeed installed here. But in order to use plugins, Docker has set all plugins to be experimental mode right now. So I have to enable the experimental flag for my local CLI in order to use that. So to do that, I'm going to create the config.json in the home.docker directory. And I'm just going to put in here experimental enabled. Okay, and now if I do a Docker app ls, oops, I think it's lowercase. There we go. Okay, now it runs. And right now I don't have any apps installed here, and that works. So in order to use plugins, you do have to actually enable experimental support for your local CLI. Now, with the CLI plugin stuff, okay, what other cool things can we do here? At the end of the day, yes, Docker app is a compiled Go project, but you can actually do something else pretty cool. And we were throwing this idea around with the captains a while ago. And Sebastian from Docker, let's see, where did I do it? He threw together this kind of proof of concept CLI plugin. And let me scroll down just a little bit. So here's the gist, okay? And I'm going to copy this in and add this plugin. And I'll explain how this is working in just a second. Make it executable. And now I can do Docker changelog. Oops. Oops, I didn't put it in the right directory, huh? Okay, now I can run Docker changelog, and now I've added functionality to the Docker CLI. Okay, so let me dive in a little bit on how this is working. So if we look at the changelog, in this case, it's just a bash script. Okay, and the bash script, what it's going to do is it's going to take the arguments coming in, and there's really two different things that you have, or really one thing you have to support, and then beyond that, it's up to your particular plugin. So every script needs to support an argument, being called with an argument of Docker CLI plugin metadata, and what the expected output is going to be a JSON snippet to provide a schema version, a vendor version, description, URL. And we see here that when he wrote this plugin, he just put in some hard-coded values. Now, where does this show up? Okay, if I do a Docker just help, okay, and if I scroll up, I see these management commands, and I see changelog, and I see a star next to it, which indicates that this is a plugin. And then it's using the description and author and version information to display right here. So let me go swap that out with my name just because I want to claim it as mine. And so if I go in here and change the vendor to be, let's say Dynoman, why not? And now if I run my help, I'll see that, oh, it went too far. Then I see that the author is now there. So that metadata is just kind of used to help fill in CLI information. But after that, other than that single argument, it's really up to your own plugin to figure out what it is that you want. So theoretically, yes, it's possible for you to create your own plugins to extend the Docker CLI, to add functionality. Say, hey, maybe for your company, your organization, you want to add your own integrations to work with your registry, or how you create projects, or how you ship things. I don't know, whatever. You can write your own bash scripts, put them in your home .docker/CLI plugins, and extend the CLI. And it's pretty powerful. And I imagine, we see this with Docker app, and we see this with like cluster and registry and BuildX. We see a lot of these new plugins coming, and I see that. And I envision that a lot of the new capabilities, new features, are going to be done through plugins where they can evolve rapidly. Maybe they can have their own update life cycles and everything without having to update the entire engine itself.
Yeah.
Especially with Docker being on a twice-a-year release. Well, hey, you can push updates to BuildX without having to ship all of Docker again. And,
I got a feeling. I'm just going to guess out here that I think it would be really cool to have like a whole show on custom plugins, right? We could probably fill a whole show on it. But I have a feeling that it's going to, basically what it's going to do is it's for us in the community that if we do take advantage of these plugins and like make community plugins, it would be about automation, right? It would be about, let me take things that were previously a bunch of different commands or multiple commands in Docker, or maybe, like you said, maybe something specific to my system where, yesterday we had some really cool demos from Marcos around the context command, and basically allowing you to quickly change environments from a one-liner. And then he showed an example that was a for each loop where he could do a bash one-liner that basically went through all the different contexts that you have, and then did a bunch of commands on different servers, basically. So you could do sort of a multi-server command. But now I can say, okay, well, shoot, the Docker context command is built into Docker. Let me just put that into a different subcommands, and essentially you could create some sort of, I deploy something to all of my contexts, right? All at the same time with a one-liner.
Yeah, maybe you can make a context all command or plugin that then just takes whatever you pass afterwards as the arguments that you execute. Yeah.
Yeah. We've all. One of the areas that I think I'm interested in, especially from the plugin perspective, is like we've often talked about multi-swarm and multi-cluster management. And Docker is supposedly working on tools on that. We haven't really seen the betas of any of that stuff. They showed some betas a while ago, but we haven't heard anything lately. And I'm thinking, wow, a lot of this stuff, if you designed your clusters right and you had the right context and everything, you might be able to just do a bunch of automation in the command line that way it can talk to you can talk over SSH now to a remote Docker engine, and if that was a swarm, I mean, I'm getting off track, but I'm sitting here thinking,
all good.
multiple plugin options that people could use, and all they really need to know is Bash or their own language of choice, really.
Well, and that's the cool thing. So you can extend it however makes sense for you, or make up some stuff. I just want to show this off real quick. So where we were also contemplating with amongst the captains, and like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was this plugin library or manager? Where do you share these community plugins? We kind of threw out a couple ideas. We probably want to think about this, or can you package up the plugin as an image and ship it that way? And Lucas came up with this actually really cool idea and he's called it Clip, the Docker Clients Plugin Manager.
That is
so
really
you can
cool.
basically install this and manage plugins, install plugins pretty easily. And he's got some pretty cool ones here. So like Expose. I can just do that real quick. So if I do
I didn't even know this was a thing. I guess I missed this in the 'cause yesterday I was going to ask, but we talked about it so long yesterday. I was like, this is another topic. I'm not going to bring it up. But yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I'm just going to run this Nginx container, and so it's running on my local host 8080. And let me just grab the container ID. All right. So I can do Docker Expose that container ID port 80, and now it's going to set up some networks, and it's going to use nggrok, and now I can open this up in my browser, and now it's proxying through that, and so now this is actually available to the public internet and anybody that wants to use it. So imagine like I'm working on something, I want to demo this to somebody else on the other side of the world or whatever. How can I do that? How am I going to, do I really want to share my home public IP or how port forwarding, all that stuff? Well, hey, here's a quick proxy way to do that. And so this was another little plugin that just goes, hey, that's pretty easy. There's a micro scanner to do a scan of your images. Dive.
Yeah, this is really neat.
Okay, Docker Dive, Nginx. Yeah. This isn't going to look very pretty on the split screen here. Let me close one of these sides out.
I mean, this is lowering the barrier of entry in order to create plugins and making a little bit of more organically creating more plugins, and let's see which plugins win by usage. Then that's more or less the use case of the best use case for everyone.
Yep, absolutely. So here's just a quick dive on Nginx. If you haven't looked at Dive, I'm not going to give you the run through on it now, but it's super awesome to see what's
it's an
what's
image
in your
visualizer in the command line.
Yeah, and it's pretty intense if you're new to images and whatnot. But
right.
But anyway, so there's a lot of different commands there, and we imagine that yes, this will continue to grow. It'd be possible for again anybody to create their own plugins to meet whatever their own needs are. So with that, I'll quit sharing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and app I think has a lot of potential. We've got there. It feels like, so we talked about earlier this week I think it was on Tuesday, the first day of the show. We talked about Docker Desktop Enterprise templates and Application Designer, which is the beginning of when you start working on things where you want to use standard templates in your company that maybe everybody has agreed upon. And we talked about how it's not just Docker files, and it holds a lot of things. The templates can be Docker files, compose files, environment variables, all the stuff that essentially flows into Docker app. And so I kind of look at Docker app's a part of all that. But to me, if I were to try to elevator pitch this whole new workflow, essentially you could start with the templating system that's right now only for Docker Desktop Enterprise, but you start with that. It comes with a visualizer that allows you to do a GUI for starting up new apps and managing apps for local development. And then when you start talking about how do I take that and extract all the environment variables and the things that are distinct, and then push that into production in a reliable, more workflow type way that's more GitOps focused, not strictly GitOps, but more along the lines of that, more infrastructure as code type stuff. That's where I feel like Docker app starts to fill that in, this gets so much beyond just raw containers, right? So it's hard to talk about it because people have to know containers and they have to know Compose and YAML and all these things first, and then we start talking about, okay, these are the workflow tools that your team is eventually going to need in order to do containers all day. I mean, if you're going to end up starting to deploy everything into containers, you're living in dev, test, and prod in containers all day, and you need these higher level workflow tools. And
yeah, absolutely. And so kind of just funny thing along those lines. I mean, so as you mentioned, Docker app is a higher level tool that you have to understand a lot of pieces in order to really get the most out of it. And so I did a workshop with Sylvan from the Docker App team at DockerCon, and we had an interesting experience because lots of people were registering for DockerCon. They see the workshops and they're like, yeah, Docker App, deploying your apps with Docker App. And they're like, yeah, I want to deploy my apps with Docker. That sounds great. And not realizing that, okay, this is more a more advanced tool. So we had a lot of people come in that were like, I feel completely overwhelmed right now.
Yeah.
How do I get started and everything?
Yeah.
But it was still a great opportunity for them to see how the pieces fit together, and even if they don't fully understand it. And one thing I should mention too is, I was doing demos deploying Docker apps on Swarm, but you can also deploy to Kubernetes, and it uses the Compose on Kubernetes stuff. So you can write your app once and run it on both orchestrators, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. I had to throw that in there because it's pretty awesome.
I was wondering when that was going to show up.
I think we just need to run the little. I think it should have been on the screen the whole time. Just this little dude down in the corner. So in case you've not been a total distraction on this, if you haven't been to DockerCon, one of Mike's alternate personalities, it was a secret for a while. Didn't know who was in the dino costume, but someone's walking around the conference in a dino costume, and not everybody realized that he was actually working with Docker on this. So
we almost got kicked out. Some people thought I was a rogue vendor trying to sell products or something like that.
Yeah. And so Mike came up with this idea. He's like, hey, what if we talk about, like, you can bring your legacy apps along? So the dyno has this whole, the idea around it, right, if I'm getting it right, is that it's about bringing your legacy apps, because they will all work in Docker too. So you got to migrate those in. So dynos being the legacy, and you're bringing those along, right?
That's right. Your dyno apps deserve love too.
Dyno apps deserve love too, and it was all about getting a selfie with the dyno. And then he had Amy in there as a, or Abby. Sorry, it was Abby, right?
Yep.
Abby Fuller.
Yep.
And
then
another dyno.
So at DockerCon this year during replay day, one of my talk was selected for replay, and those talks aren't recorded, so why not start the talk in the dyno seat? Someone
did get a video of it though, so now it's on the internet.
Yes, it is there for the world to see.
Well, before we wrap this up, I want to make sure that we get any of the questions answered. So I'm going to do a quick scan. If you have any more questions about Docker 1903 features, or even stuff we talked about yesterday or the day before, or anything that the two guys talked about today, get those questions in real quick before we wrap this up for a week of 1903. We had a question a little bit about virtual machines versus containers, but I think those got answered in chat. And someone asked about some of this rootless stuff and stuff different than Kata containers, and I kind of replied in chat that basically that's like whenever you start talking about a VM isolation, you're always going to have more security, because I think that's something that even a kernel vulnerability in Linux can't escape a VM. You would have to have a virtualization vulnerability. So technically, from a security boundary perspective, yes, Kata containers, clean containers, anything from any of the virtualization vendors, they're going to be more isolation, but that comes at a cost. You've got to have more management. You've got to have more layers of management. You've got to have more resources available. There's more complexity because now you have all these different OSs with their own OS updates. Now you got to worry about the kernel versions being patched on every single one of these. Like, those are the Kata containers, and these other ones are trying to make that easier, but it's still more work. So for a lot of people, that's not necessary. They're not trying to go for that level of isolation, and I think Docker isolation is sufficient, especially if we can start talking about user namespaces and rootless Docker and stuff like that. So I think it's really just about
depends on what you want to share also between containers, because virtual machines is a lot more isolated, but still virtual machines are not like unbreakable. There are also vulnerabilities there, and depends on what you want to isolate and what you want to share between those.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. One quick question for you. Someone asked earlier about, is this available for Windows? And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that either. I think not, but I haven't, because I'm working on a Mac. I'm certainly there is nothing about the Mac because it's a different kernel. But For Windows, I don't know. I haven't checked about it. I think I would say not.
Yeah, my assumption would be no too. Like we don't know, so maybe just do a quick rootless Docker Windows Google search. But pretty sure no. I mean, not that Microsoft wouldn't do it, but it's a whole different kernel. It's a whole different problem.
I think it would be a different work in order to be done, and I haven't seen anything about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot in Windows in particular. You're talking about running, because a lot of Windows apps would be running IIS and other things, and with Windows containers being when you get down into the internals of how Windows deals with containers, it's quite different. We're
talking about Windows kernel containers. We're not talking about WSL2 containers of the Linux kernel inside the Windows, which I would say is, if it's emulation of the Linux kernel, or I'm not sure if it's even called emulation or if it's a real kernel, I would say that rootless should work there. But about Windows kernel, that's a different story.
Yeah, there is now, I think it's just this year we got it. There is now process isolation containers in Docker for Docker on Windows platforms like Docker Server or Windows Server. Sorry. So you can technically run a Windows binary in a Docker container without its own kernel, which is a pretty new thing. So we're getting closer, right? Mm-hmm. We're getting closer to that. So for everyone, my wife over here is mentioning, maybe you should summarize 1903. Oh, someone asked. Oh, okay. So yeah, summarize 1903, right? That's a great wrap up. So let me I'll see if I can, I've been here all week, so I'm going to be tested, and you guys let me know if I miss anything. So major new things are, there's this whole, so let's talk about Community Edition first. So for the open source Docker, we're talking about the engine and the command line. We mentioned plugins today. That's a big thing. So there are multiple new features in the command line, like BuildX, which uses BuildKit, and Docker App, which uses the app plugin. And those are open source free plugins for the Docker command line that are technically, I guess BuildKit is using an engine feature, but they're largely just command line functionality. But in addition to that, we have context, which you saw yesterday. So Docker Context is now a new feature that allows you to change your environment from the command line with one line. So if you're familiar with kube control, it has a context of its own. Docker has now added that functionality to Docker. So for Docker environments, you get a very similar experience with managing different environments without having to write scripts to automate your shell environment variables, essentially. All right, so we have that. Now, if you start talking about engine, Docker, and I'll just share screen real quick. Docker has the whole release notes. So for Docker CE, there are releases. And let me see if I can pull that up. Share my screen. Yeah, so I'll put this link into chat.
I like how the Dino's still romping on it too. So.
Yeah, that's right. We still got Dino. Not that. We went this over here. So the changelog. So if you go to github.com/docker/docker-ce/releases, the open source version of Docker has a changelog for every version. So you can scroll through. Basically, this is the 1903 right here is the one we're talking about, released last week. And so you can go through and see every major PR, every fix. Basically it's all here. So you can go through and see the swarm features that were added, the security enhancements, runtime enhancements, command line enhancements, all that stuff. A lot of it's fixing bugs. New networking stuff. So IPVLAN is no longer an experimental. There's just a crap ton in here that you could fill an hour with just going through each one of these and talking about. More than an hour, easily. So the other big thing, though, with Docker 1903 is the release of the Docker Enterprise 3.0 platform. So that is the server side. That's the DTR and UCP stuff that you're going to see in the Docker Enterprise offering, and that's going to offer you Kubernetes, the newer versions of Kubernetes. I think it's 114 or 113 that came out. I think it's maybe 114. And so there's going to be a new stuff there. Then on the show on Monday, you saw us demo Docker Desktop Enterprise, which is a brand new product. It is a superset of what you get with what we showed today. So what we were showing today was all open source stuff. What you saw Monday, part of the show, was the brand new separate install than the Docker desktop that we all use today, which is the CE version. There is a enterprise version now. And by the way, if you want more information on that, go back to Monday's show, and we talk about how to get in contact with Docker and the Docker team on not Monday's show, Tuesday's show, the first show, day one. Feels like it was Monday. And so we talked more about that there, and you can you can talk with those people on how to get access to that, because it's a brand new product that they're working on releasing. And actually, it is released. You have to get it through a reseller or a Docker partner right now. And that's going to add a whole bunch of new stuff, including an application designer GUI. There's a feature in there that is called Assemble. So it's not Avengers Assemble. It's Docker Assemble, which allows you to basically take an old app of certain frameworks and automate it into a Docker container. So it doesn't take a VM. It just takes the app out of a different operating system or a different framework and pulls it in on popular frameworks to Docker. So that's a really quick way to migrate an app and get started and save you potentially hours worth of time. And that's a new feature. Docker Template's a new feature in that, which allows you to create this whole templating thing I talked about. Let's see. What else am I missing, guys? Anything?
Just one other, and this is CE, big feature that was announced. It was kind of quietly announced because it doesn't affect everybody. Is now built-in GPU support to the engine. And so that's definitely going to be a big thing for certain groups, especially data analysis or TensorFlow kind of stuff or whatever that need the GPU access. So that's a pretty big deal too.
Yeah, I forgot about that. They demoed that at DockerCon.
Yep.
That was like -- GPU, right? Just on a Docker run command?
Yep. And there's still a little bit of host config that's needed to allow your NVIDIA GPUs to be available within the container. But yeah, it doesn't get much easier.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I think for those of you wanting to know if that's going to be in Swarm, the GPU stuff is not in Swarm yet. But if you've seen this show before, we talk about my dog versus cat repo a lot, and you can find that in old videos on my channel, where basically we show how you can just spin up a Docker run command from inside a Swarm service. So you essentially just have Docker run a service that runs a container for you, and then you can use the GPUs. So you technically can do that in Swarm. You can't do it with the service create command. You just have to nest the commands in it, and it works. So what else?
And
anything else?
A side note on the GPU also, it works also in the rootless mode, because it's not necessary to have root in order to work with the GPU.
Oh,
that's
It's
cool.
a nice bonus.
Yeah. So I think that we're going to see more examples of real-world use cases on those rootless, and especially I think I'm excited for it for CI and for us to figure out how basically we different ways of building out CI clusters so that it's easier for your CI to run in Docker, and then it run the Docker stuff that it needs to inside the CI without the CI having to be root on all the systems or have root access.
Yeah.
So
I would say that production environments probably are going to shift in order to work with rootless mode, because if they shouldn't be necessary to run in root, and it certainly is more secure. So I would say I would probably see some kind of shift in order to rootless mode for production clusters.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah, like maybe like the I can see Kubernetes doing that first, since Swarm has a problem with kernels. I wonder if Kubernetes could run and just it'd be interesting to see. I haven't seen anything other than Docker run. Obviously, what you showed today, I haven't really seen anyone talk about rootless mode yet. So yeah, it'd be cool. All right, well. I think that's all the questions. Let me check one last quick time. Yeah, of the show. Dynos, summarize. We got it all. All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for giving us great demos today. And of course, if you want to see the other shows, look either in the description or the show notes. We put some links in the chat for the previous days. Just basically look back in the channel of wherever you're at, whether on Facebook or YouTube, and see those. I will definitely give us a thumbs up and comments if you want to see these guys back on the show talking about other things. Give us topics you want to hear about. We will come up with ideas but we always love ideas from you. So if you haven't seen this show before, I am live every Thursday at this time, actually. Every Thursday, usually with a guest, like these guys here, or someone else in the community. So if you have ideas for topics, we will love to put them on the list. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week on YouTube Live.
Yep.